For tonight's question time, we've come to the East Yorkshire port city of Hull. And there's no greater place in the UK as an example of the changing face of British politics. Just last week, Hull elected a brand new Reform UK mayor, the former Olympic champion boxer Luke Campbell. At Westminster level, the city is dominated by Labour, but flanked on all sides by Conservative constituencies. And just for good measure, the Liberal Democrats run the city council. But our audience here, arriving this evening, as with every other week, reflects the wide range of political views and voting record across the nation. And they want to discuss trade deals, the political upheaval of last week's election results, and net zero by 2050, a worthy cause or a lost one? Welcome to Question Time from Hull. On the panel from the government is Treasury Minister James Murray, who is Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, which means he's part of Chancellor Rachel Reeves's team that looks after tax. Graham Stuart was Net Zero Minister in the last Conservative government, but now calls the current government's net zero plans madness. Calum Miller was elected to Parliament last July for the Liberal Democrats. He speaks for the party on foreign affairs and is one of 72 Lib Dem MPs. Richard Tice is the Deputy Leader of Reform UK. He also became an MP last year, one of the 5 in the Commons. He says his party will win the next general election. And Jo Grady, General Secretary of the University and College Union, perhaps agrees. Last week she said if Labour doesn't materially improve the conditions of the working class, we will have a reform government in 4 years' time. Welcome to our panel, welcome to our audience here in Hull. Very good to see you all. And of course, welcome to you at home. You can just sit back and watch the programme, or you can also join in the debate, always a lively one, that goes on social media as well. Let's start with our first question, which is from Paul Green.
Given the huge success of Reform Party in last week's elections, who should be more worried? Labour, the Conservatives, or the electorate?
So, sweeping wins for Reform last week, big gains for the Lib Dems. Labour lost more than 180 councillors. The Conservatives lost 670 councillors. I believe the Conservative leader called it a bloodbath. James.
So I think that when the electorate goes to the polls and we have an election result, we need to make sure we're listening and work out what message to take from the electorate going to the polls. Now, you know, local elections don't necessarily translate directly into general elections, but it is important that politicians listen to what voters are saying. And I would take 2 key things from the election results earlier this month. Firstly, in terms of what I should think and what my colleagues and I in government should think. And I think what's really important for us to recognise is that people are still really angry at the state of the country. The state of the country as it was at the general election last year, the reason why a lot of people voted for a new government, why people voted for change, a lot of that still needs to change, and people need to feel that change in their lives in terms of money in their pockets, in terms of NHS waiting lists and so on. And we can point to what we've done in the first 9 or 10 months with NHS waiting lists coming down 6 months in a row, national minimum wage going up £1,400, pensions going up £470. We can point to the start that we've made in terms of delivering the change, but people are really impatient to feel that. They want it more. They want to actually feel the difference in their lives. And I think that's the message that I take away from those elections, in that, you know, we will be judged on whether we deliver. We'll be judged on whether we make people feel better off, put more money in people's pockets, keep getting NHS waiting lists down, get immigration down, and that's what we need to do in government.
Talking of putting more money in people's pockets, winter fuel allowance. That came up a lot on the doorstep. That's what lots of your MPs are saying. You know that lots of Labour MPs, including one former Cabinet Minister, are very, very unhappy about the performance of Labour at the moment. Keir Starmer is saying we will go further and faster. Does that not sound like more of the same?
Well, let me explain to you exactly what I think Keir Starmer meant when he said go further and faster, and certainly how I understand it listening to the electorate. When I was knocking on doors in the recent local elections, and you know, some people did mention the winter fuel payment, and a lot of people would say to me, look, it was a tough decision. We know it was a tough decision. We know you've had to make lots of tough decisions because of what you inherited. But we want to see the change which making those tough decisions enables. And when Keir Starmer talks about going further and faster, when I talk about that, when we talk about that as a government, what we mean is, look, we've had to take tough decisions, difficult decisions, because of the mess we inherited. what we need to go further and faster on is delivering the change that enables.
But
so getting the NHS
not changing course.
No,
that's the key thing.
We're not changing policy.
Despite the results and despite what you're hearing on the doorstep.
Look, it's not a decision that any of us in government wanted to have to take. Okay. But there's a lot of decisions we've taken which we didn't want to have to take.
So basically, you're not actually listening. You're not listening to the electorate. The electorate have just rejected
Richard, what I was saying, the message that I took from people who I was speaking to during the election was that they understood why we'd made tough decisions, but they want to feel the difference in their lives, and that's what we are focused on resolutely as a government.
So they didn't trust you, and so they voted for us. So we won the 16th safest Labour parliamentary seat. And that's because actually people are furious about the fact that you haven't delivered on smashing the gangs and stopping the boats. Some 36% more illegals have come over the channel since January. You're not smashing the gangs, you're encouraging the gangs. You're not controlling legal immigration with this new Indian trade deal that's just been announced yesterday.
Which makes no change to immigration policy.
That will lead to significant increase.
I can't let you just say something which is totally
untrue. Tell you what, we will get to the trade deal and give you opportunity.
What we heard on the doors was people are furious about the levels of immigration, they're furious about the bills going up, and the bills are going up because of net stupid zero, which are £300 higher almost than they were at the time of the general election.
Since you've jumped in, Richard, I wasn't going to come to you next, but since you have jumped in, this is the first time that Reform have had executive power. What are you going to do with it?
We're going to save money. We're going to audit the finances in these councils, open the books.
Which will cost you money, obviously, to do that.
No, because we've got great councillors who will do that work. I was in Lincoln yesterday with my 44 county councillors there, and we've got some great skills, great finance directors. So they will go in, they will save money, they will look at the books, and then they've got to sort things out and deliver the services for better value.
So what do you want to do with the money you claim you'll be able to save?
Well, that is essentially... many of these councils are going bust. I mean, dozens of county councils as we speak.
So what would you like to spend it on?
Well, you've actually got to save money and deliver the services, procure the contracts with people better. You don't need to give long 10-year contracts.
So do the same. So is there anything you do different? That's what I'm asking. You're now in a position where you can actually do stuff. What do you want to do?
Place the contracts better, smarter, and not negotiate overpriced contracts on long 10, 15-year deals. That's how you save money. That's how you sort things out. And I think that's what...
OK, so if you save the money, what do you want to do with the money you've saved?
Well, then that's a good position to be in because...
I know, so what do you want to do?
Well, then you can start to, for example, you can reduce the increases in council tax, or you could actually... you can then provide better services in the critical area, for example, in SEN provision in regard to social care. But the first thing you've got to do is save the money and stop wasting money. And I think everybody knows there is waste all over the place, at the council level and at the national level.
Jo.
There's a blunt truth here, everyone. Not a single political party in the UK, and certainly none of the parties represented around this table, are offering solutions to the issues that we face. Labour have moved further and further away from the average working class person, you know, to a point where communities like this in Hull, like the one where I'm from in Wakefield, which would have always elected Labour representatives, particularly here in Hull, have turned to Reform. But I want to be really, really clear, because I don't think Richard Tice and I don't think Nigel Farage or Reform are the answer. Reform, and we've just heard it, are offering nothing for working people. They're offering nothing on what is a rigged economy. They're offering nothing on how we're going to tackle privatisation. In fact, what you were just saying is we'll negotiate better contracts. Nothing on the NHS. Nothing... Can I finish, please? Nothing on a crumbling infrastructure of transport. Nothing on wages and the crippling cost of living. Nothing on a housing crisis. All Reform stands for is a status quo politically, but with an added dose of finger-pointing.
But, Jo, why do you think people voted for them?
I'm getting onto that, but I think that there's a real issue because it wasn't immigrants that were cutting council funding in Hull, it was politicians. It wasn't immigrants who were slashing school budgets in Hull, it was politicians. And Reform would have been doing those things too, but what I think is, you know, you are offering people... I think you're being fraudulent. I think you're offering people the suggestion that you're going to change...
Hang on, let her finish and I'll let you back in.
But when you've just been asked how you're going to change things, all you gave was coded, we're going to privatise more. And this is the truth that working class communities need to hear. We have to come together. We have to join trade unions. We have to tell the political class, whether they're Reform, whether they're Labour, whether they're anyone else, because Nigel Farage and you are members of that political class, that we aren't having it anymore.
Who's the party that actually for 6 6 years has been saying that we should keep British Steel in public ownership and invest in it. Guess who? Reform UK. OK? So we know that just down the road in Scunthorpe, and frankly, Nigel and I, we have essentially helped ensure that British Steel and those blast furnaces were saved and those thousands of jobs and
Absolute
families...
rubbish.
That's the truth, Jo. You may not like to hear it, but that is the truth.
You were also the party arguing for Brexit to save the NHS, and you've got no answers for that.
And thanks to Brexit, we've now got a new US trade deal in outline terms announced today.
Let's hear from... Hang on. We are going to get on to trade deals in a moment, but let's hear from Audrey, because there's lots of hands up, and I'm sure you'd like to put your 10 penneth in. Yes, woman here in the front.
Just a couple of points, really. So, yeah, I agree. I think Reform, the only thing we hear from them is big statements. We're going to do this. We're going to stop the boats. We're going to make the working class person feel better. But what you never seem to answer is how. There's never a clear plan. There's not even a two-step plan. Just to say, how are you going to do it? And actually, a lot of your councillors are inexperienced. It's their first time in local government. So just saying they're going to do it and they're going to work smart is not really enough. You know, if I applied for a job and I just said, hire me because I'm great, I wouldn't get the job. I need a reference, I need backup, and I need facts to show I've done it before. In terms of Labour, I think Labour are completely missing the point in saying we're going to go harder and faster so that people can feel the change that we're talking about. No, what you've done in the last 12 months has completely betrayed the people that have voted for you, the people that want change, the hard-working people, the compassionate, kind people that want a good life for everyone. But actually what you've done is given us Tory light. You've gone more right-wing. What we're saying to you is, no, go to the left. That's what we want. Why is it that the last 12 months, the people you've decided to target are the disabled, the poor, the old, all of the vulnerable people? They're your electorate. They're the ones that you should be in support of, not penalising them.
OK, let me hear from the man in the black top.
I just find it incredible what Richard Tice is saying there, because what we've seen with Brexit, under every single metric, our country is poorer. It's a fact. And everything we're trying to do on the outside of that is just, you know, nibbling away at the edges. So when people say we have no money in our pockets, Brexit and what you stood for has caused that.
Absolutely.
And then when you talk...
Hang on. Richard, you have to let people have their say. You've had a long speech already. Yeah. We have to hear what other people have to say. Yes.
And then when you're talking about an Indian trade deal being an issue, hang on a minute, I thought you said we're supposed to trade with the rest of the world. There's big opportunities. And as soon as there's a deal with another country, then yet you're complaining about it. Like, where's the... It's hypocrisy at its finest. And I think, you know, we've been duped. We've been duped as a nation. Brexit was the biggest con to enforce economic sanctions on ourselves, and it's affected every single facet of life, and that's a fact. And I know there's a lot of Brexit remorse. It's not about, you know, it's not about ideology towards the European Union or anything like that. They're our closest trading partner, and we've lost so much because of it, and we're suffering because of it, and that's a fact. Now, when people say we knew what we voted for, this is what we voted for, guys. We voted to make ourselves poorer in the name of perceived sovereignty. Now, that's, for me, that's the issue. And can I just say one more point? With the winter fuel, I think if you look at it, the Labour communication has been absolutely shocking. If you think that there's been less than probably just under 1 million people who needed it but didn't have it, but then we have people who were means tested who have it, then that's where there's a disconnect. So actually, if it is important, which it is, then actually you should be saying, why have we got people who have it, supposed to have it now, who haven't been claiming it, who aren't means tested? So that needed to be communicated in a much more cohesive, better way.
Woman in the red top.
Hi. Yeah, so going back to the winter fuel, what really worries me now is because of the confusion and how it was delivered, how on earth is everybody feeling here and across the country about the Labour reform with the disability allowance? Because to me and my friends, talking about Labour and going forward, no one trusts anything, because we don't feel as though you actually have the backs of the ordinary people.
And can I ask, did you trust them before? Did you vote them before, or have you always felt like this?
Well, I basically have changed my voting opinions over the last 4 or 5 years quite rapidly, and now I'm completely confused of who to vote for.
Right.
Because I don't really trust any of the policies, because nothing seems to be delivered. It's talked about, it isn't delivered, and everybody just seems to be whirling around and nothing seems to be moving forward for the better of the country.
OK. Well, Graham, let's see if you can do any better than that. So the question was, given the huge success of reform, who should be more worried, Labour, the Conservatives or the electorate? I mean, Labour are getting quite a lot of flack from the audience here, as are Reform to a certain extent. Obviously, the Conservatives had a terrible night, a bloodbath, Kemi Badenoch called it.
Yeah, well, we had a tremendous performance in 2021. There's kind of vaccine rollout, probably one of the best performances we'd ever had. So
but even taking that into account,
that was
it
going
was
to be
terrible.
a difficult. No, exactly. It was a terrible night, and we had our record defeat last year, July, and it's less than a year since that, and people have not forgiven us yet. We've got to work hard to rebuild trust and get back. What normally happens is you get a new government in. It's given a honeymoon. Even if you didn't vote for a new Labour government, you kind of give it a chance, don't you? You hope it's going to do something. And the first thing it did was attack your nan and take away the winter fuel payment. It's nearly 1 million people, of the very poorest people who are eligible for pension credit but don't claim it for whatever reason. We've all tried over the years and we'll keep trying to get them to claim it. Those people losing out. The farmers. We've got farmers now literally looking at suicide in order to avoid the impact of the family farm tax. Now, whoever voted Labour in this audience, none of you voted for that. None of you voted to see stamp duty go up on first-time buyers or have this jobs tax come in, which is absolutely destructive of business. And it's worth remembering, notwithstanding our unpopularity, that we were the fastest-growing nation in the whole G7 when we left power. Inflation was back to 2%.
So why didn't more people vote for you on Thursday, then?
4 million more people were in work.
OK,
well,
so why didn't people vote for you,
It's less than a year.
If you think the Labour's doing so badly, why don't they think, let's go back to Conservatives, then?
As the audience is making clear, the Labour is doing very badly. But the fact that they came in is one of the...
No, I'm asking about the Conservatives.
Exactly.
You're here representing Conservatives. If you think Labour are doing so badly, why didn't more people turn to you on Thursday?
Well, I think that it's, as the lady in red said, it's going to undermine trust in the whole political system. Because throughout the Conservatives were promised change by Labour, that immediately went sour until there's a sort of feeling of a plague on all your houses. And I think that's part of where we're at. And we've got a lot of work to do to rebuild trust with you.
And do you take any responsibility for that? Boris Johnson, Liz Truss?
Well, absolutely. We own that. We own that defeat. We lost the confidence of the people. And if you're a democratic nation, that's what you have to do. So we have to say sorry for that. And we have to work hard to build it up. But in answer to Paul's question, what I don't think we need, and the audience is already starting to focus on the questions now for Richard, what exactly are you going to do? How are you going to do this? Because it's all very well criticising, but we want to know what your programme for government is. And I'm confident we'll see if Richard and Nigel and the merry crew can come forward and persuade you over the next 4 years, well, fine. But I think it's more likely than not they don't have an answer to the how. They don't really know how they can make lives better. And therefore, it's incumbent on the Conservatives, under Kemi Badenoch, to rebuild trust with you, make our case to you, and put this country back on a steady position again, because Labour have let everyone down so very, very badly. So,
Calum, obviously the Lib Dems did well. I know you're pleased with the results on Thursday. What were you hearing on the doorstep? I mean, just reflecting what... So I don't know your name, the woman in the red top there. Lisa, what Lisa was saying, I don't know who to vote for anymore.
Absolutely. Well, I think Lisa makes an extremely good point about this absence of trust, and I was really struck by what one of the other participants said about compassionate and kind people. I mean, when I stood and talked to people on the doorstep, I didn't get people who were angry. I got people who were deeply disappointed and had a lack of trust in the main parties. People, as Graham rightly says, people have not forgiven the Conservatives for where the country was left last year, and people have been deeply disappointed by the performance of the Labour government. So it's no surprise that people voted in significant numbers for the Liberal Democrats across the country and in significant numbers for reform. So to come back to Paul's question, I really hope that people will take a good hard look at the alternatives to reform. If people want change, Liberal Democrats have made their reputation. I think one of the reasons that we did well in these elections is that we work extremely hard locally. Most of our candidates are very embedded in their local communities, and where we've had Liberal Democrat MPs elected in last year's general election, we've seen real success in local government, and that's because people have seen what having a Liberal Democrat standing up for their community does, and they want to have more of it. So I'd really encourage people to look at the alternatives, and hopefully in that way, this isn't necessarily bad news for the electorate, but provides an opportunity to look at how we could do politics in a different and better way with the Liberal Democrats.
OK, I'm going to take a couple more points from the audience before I move on. It's a woman in the black top.
Hello. Yeah, I'm really sorry, but I have a huge issue with Richard talking about the incompetence of his colleagues on the panel when he was willing to put forward a candidate last week for a mayoral electorate position within our county council that was not qualified, not educated, not knowledgeable to do the role, didn't even want to do it until someone went into his emails and slid into his DMs effectively and asked him. And the fact
Can
that
we just check, you're talking about Luke Campbell?
I'm talking about Luke Campbell.
So let me just, for those who don't know, so Luke Campbell, who is a former Olympic champion boxer, and he was elected for Hull and East Yorkshire. And yes, he's not held political office before.
Yes,
elected
sorry.
Mayor.
Yeah, and what I would say to you, Richard, the fact that you are willing to put somebody in that position to manage this city in terms of its budget, the people in it and what is best for us shows me everything that I need to know about you as a politician and you as a party, which is this is not about people, it is about power, and that is it with reform. And I'm sorry, that is the stance of many people that I know, and I am so disappointed in the way that we've gone last week because of this.
Richard, briefly. Briefly.
Thank you. Well, at the end of the day, voters voted Luke in by a considerable majority. And, of course, we've all now got, in elected positions, we've got to stand up and deliver. And that challenge is for Luke as well as it is for Andrew Jenkins as elected Mayor of Greater Lincolnshire, just south of here. So, yeah, the pressure's on, and we're not afraid of that. But actually, maybe, if the Conservatives have broken Britain and Labour's in the process of bankrupting Britain, maybe actually we should have successful people from other walks of life who actually can come in and sort things out. And I think Luke will bring people together and can do a great job as Mayor in bringing lots of different people together, getting over sort of hurdles, maybe getting over the traditional sort of knockabout between the two main parties. And with his track record of success, I think actually the good residents and constituents should give him a chance. And I think that's why they voted him in.
But you're not actually listening to what that lady said, are you? That lady...
I've listened very clearly. Do you not believe in
And now you're not letting me talk. That lady has just said that you have kind of come into Hull, said we know best, and, you know, people in Hull, and I think elsewhere, have voted for reform because they're sick of mainstream parties, and they thought, let's coin toss it, let's give reform a chance. And she's just told you she's got legitimate concerns, and you've essentially sort of patted her on the head and said, don't worry, we know what we're doing, we've got zero plans,
I've said we welcome the scrutiny and the challenge is on, and we will respond to that. And so now the challenge is for us to deliver. Absolutely right.
Well, can I just say, given that Luke Campbell was elected as Mayor, we haven't heard from anyone who supported that decision, and obviously there will be people in this audience who supported that decision. Let's hear from one. Yes, man in the check shirt there.
So I've been a Tory voter all my life. Most of my family are, most of my friends are. I would say now 90% of them vote Reform. That is because, you know, we had a lot of years of a Conservative government that didn't do a good job particularly. You know, unpopular decisions were often made and ineffective decisions. Equally, you know, most of my sort of circle couldn't bring themselves to vote Labour. I mean, I'm an accountant, and the way that you're handling the economy is just... it's economic illiteracy, to be honest with you. Give Luke Campbell a chance. He can't do any worse than what's gone previous. He honestly can't. He can't do any worse than what's gone previously. And as to he's not qualified, he's got no experience, everybody has to start somewhere. Reform have to start somewhere. At some point, we have to challenge the status quo because the status quo isn't working for Britain, is it?
OK. All right. Let's move on. But before we do, I want to tell you where we are next week, in case you would like to come and be part of the audience. So next week we're in Aldershot in Hampshire. The following week we're in Dulwich in South London. So if you live in or nearby either place, you'd like to come and be part of the audience, as our audience is here tonight in Hull, go to the Question Time website. The instructions are all there, and hopefully we will see you Aldershot and then Dulwich. OK, next question from Katie Thorpe. Where are you, Katie? Thanks.
Is the UK-US trade deal a victory for the government?
Right, so that just happened today, didn't it? I mean, it's less of a kind of full-fat deal and more of an outline of a deal with certain aspects to it. And, of course, there was the India trade deal earlier this week as well. Is it a victory for the government, Graham?
Well, we don't know all the details yet. What it doesn't appear to be is a full trade deal. As I said, a sort of Diet Coke rather than the original deal. And if it's not a full trade deal, then there are legality questions to get into the technicalities around that. But put crudely, we've got the man who authored The Art of the Deal, who basically said what you do is you go with such an extraordinarily extreme negotiating position that when you become still extreme but less extreme later, the other side will just cave into you. And we've got a deal where basically our tariffs on US imports have gone down. I actually welcome that. I want lower taxes on products that people want to buy. And the tariffs on UK products going into the US has gone up. That's the reality compared to where we were before. So it's not a triumph, but I do think, given where we're at with Donald Trump and given the importance of, for instance, the car industry, that it was important to engage and seek the best deal we could. The India deal, I think...
Actually, just before you get on to the India deal, Kemi Badenoch said tonight, this deal is not historic, we've just been shafted. It sounds to me like you feel a bit more positive about it than that.
Well, we have been... I was saying, basically, the tariffs... we've cut our tariffs on US imports, and they've raised their tariffs on us. Now, you don't exactly want to celebrate that as a great triumph.
I mean, it's very strong language from Kemi Badenoch. We've been shafted by the US president. Do you echo that? Would you use that language?
I don't think it's a great deal. And the truth is that's what he does. He seeks to shaft people. That's his business career, isn't it? It's what he's done, Donald Trump. He is, the way he's done it, he seeks to extort from people, and that's what he's done. He's the classic kind of bully, and he's the worst face of capitalism, and he's taken that in to the most powerful country in the world. I leave it to others to judge as to... It's not a great deal, so we have been shafted. Whether we've been less shafted than we would have been if we hadn't engaged in the way that we have, time will tell. And we don't know all the details yet. We don't know the legalities around it. And this isn't even the final deal. We're talking about that happening over the coming year. We negotiate a full one. So it's pretty hard to be too definitive today, apart from to say, and Kemi's quite right, to look at it and go, well, on the face of it, this isn't a great deal for us. But India, 90% of that deal was negotiated, and from when I was in the department, which was many years ago as a trade minister, and we were working on it, big and complex with this emerging economy of India, and 90% of that work was done before the election. But I congratulate James and his colleagues for getting it over the line. I think it will be good for us to be lowering tariffs, and we'll see Scotch whisky with halved tariffs and then reducing after that. It's the biggest whisky market in the whole world. So I want to see many more people in India enjoying Scotch and many more people in this country being able to be employed by the people who make it.
So will the Conservatives be voting for it, should it ever come to the Commons?
I haven't had a steer on that yet,
okay.
But...
I mean, at the moment it's not coming to the Commons, but I just thought I'd ask you, just in case. James, have we been shafted, as Kemi Badenoch says?
No, look, this is a landmark deal. This is a landmark economic deal. And, as you know, since the Prime Minister went to Washington back in February, and he came out of that meeting saying, look, I'm going to be steady, I'm going to be stable, pragmatic, I'm going to work at getting this deal. And he's been doing that work, with all of the team around him. And now we've got a deal. And, this is not to say the job is entirely done, but there are jobs which have been won and there are jobs which have been saved. And it's good news for Britain. It's good news for our auto sector, it's good news for steel manufacturers, it's good news for British farmers. We've managed to get access for British farmers without having any change to food standards. So this is good news, and this gives us the basis on which we can have further discussions with the US to have an even stronger relationship in future.
And the American beef the American beef that's coming from the United States over to the UK, should we be worried about that? Should British farmers be worried about that?
No, absolutely not, because the food standards have not been touched by this deal, and we said that throughout the negotiations on this deal, that food standards, whether that's the hormone-treated beef or the chlorinated chicken, we would not touch those.
So does that mean the beef won't therefore be coming? That's what I'm trying to understand. Because if American beef can come in, if it meets our food standards, then presumably that's not great news for British beef farmers. Are you saying that that is not what's going to happen?
Well, it has to meet British food standards. So British food standards exist within the UK, and any imported beef or chicken from the US would have to meet those standards as they apply in the UK. And actually,
and do you think British farmers will be happy about that? British beef farmers?
Well, certainly, I've seen comments from the NFU today, which suggest that they are happy with this deal. I think it is good news that it gives British farmers access to the US market without lowering our trade standards.
What's bad news for farmers is bioethanol, because we have the Vivergo factory, 200 jobs here in Hull, and we're now going to have tariff-free bioethanol coming in, putting out of business that business. That's the risk, and that's 1 million tonnes of grain which comes from British farmers each year, converted into bioethanol that then goes into our fuel in our cars to make it lower carbon. That is going to be displaced by American target. Maybe you could comment on the bioethanol and the impact on the farmers in this area, and indeed the 200 people who work at Vivergo.
Yeah, well, I can just say that this is a broad deal that covers a lot of different sectors, and just to put this in context as well, because we have to respond to the world as it is. We can't respond to the world as we wish it was, or as we might imagine it would be. You respond to the world as it is. And the fact is that the president in the US put global tariffs on countries right around the world. And so we have to do the best for Britain in trying to get an economic deal out of that situation. And I think this has shown that our approach has been the right one. There have been lots of people in Parliament saying, why don't you start a trade war? Why don't you escalate things and so on? And what the Prime Minister and the government have been saying is, no, we're going to keep steady. We're going to be stable on this. We're going to be pragmatic. We're going to get this deal across the line, and that's what we've got to. And there are other people like the Reform leader has said that we should be more open to chlorinated chicken as part of getting this trade in place. We said no. We're going to protect our food standards, and that's what we've delivered for the British people.
OK, let me hear from our audience here. There's a man there in the glasses.
It appears to me that this trade deal with the US is more of a victory for Donald Trump's government than it is for our own, actually. And in regard to the
And why do you think that?
Well, he came out and said it first, didn't he? There's surely a reason that we're the first country since the tariffs came in to get a trade deal. Have we got to the front of the queue, or are we the guinea pigs?
OK.
And will he even honour it? That's the other question with Trump.
Man here in the front in the blue shirt.
Sounds to me like we've gone back to parity, but plus 10% for America. Why aren't we doing better deals with, say, Canada, Australasia, Middle East, even China now?
OK, Calum.
Well, I'd build on the last gentleman's comment. I mean, the biggest trading partner we have is the European Union, and we have self-defeatingly made it so much harder for our businesses to trade with the European Union. So I would agree entirely. This is a victory for Donald Trump, as the gentleman just said. Donald Trump's a bully. That's how he is taken to the world stage, whether it's in security or in economics. He is a bully. He's quite proud of the fact. And, if a bully steals your coats and says he'll give it back to you if you give him your lunch money, if you get your coat back but you've lost your lunch money, you're not better off, you're worse off. And that's where we are today.
So what would you have done? So if you were in government and faced with Donald Trump saying, the President of the United States saying, right, we're going to stick 27.5% on car exports to America, would you have just said, you're a bully, I'm not dealing with you, or what would you have done?
We would have sought to negotiate from a position of strength. The government has approached Donald Trump. It gave away a whole series of things, like a state visit, like various other things that he wanted, that he clearly wanted from the very get-go, rather than making the substance of negotiation. And the other thing we'd have done...
What, he would have said, you can come to Windsor Castle if you cut the 27.5%.
Why not? I mean, why would you go straight over and give him the one thing that he makes abundantly clear he wants? And to the gentleman's point, were we to be negotiating more actively with other key partners and having a stronger position with other democracies, other countries that are actually going to stand up for international rules and be trustworthy, having signed the deal, then we'd be in a better position. James says that this is a broad deal. One of the challenges we have as parliamentarians, much like the public, is we've got no idea what's in it. No. Parliament needs to have a say to be able to scrutinise this deal and see what the implications are, and to have some reassurance that Donald Trump will actually stick to it. Because sitting here today, I have no confidence that he won't be coming for our film industry, for pharmaceuticals, and for a variety of other industries next, because we've just shown him that by bullying us, he can get what he wants.
Any chance of a vote?
Well, no,
Just briefly, because I know you want to talk about everything, but just specifically to Calum's point, will Parliament be offered a vote on this deal?
It's my understanding it won't, but I'm not Chief Whip, sorry.
All right. Man there in the glasses.
Yeah, I think it's a bit rich that there are these politicians on either side of the coin celebrating these trade deals when you compare...
Well, there's quite a bit of not celebration.
Well, yeah. But when you compare those trade deals to the overall size of the economy, so I believe the BBC reported the India trade deal was like 4 or 5 billion. That's like less than 1 week of government spending. When you compare all these new trade deals that we've had compared to what we've lost as an economy post-Brexit, it's a night and day difference. So there isn't really anything to celebrate because we're still poorer as a country.
Yeah.
I'll come back on that just to say that going to the fastest growing parts of the world and doing deals with them for the long term puts us in a better position. We've actually grown since Brexit faster than Germany. So the idea that Europe, it is our biggest partner, but it's fairly sclerotic.
It's
so
in recession. That's the reality.
One of the opportunities for us is to open up with the fast growing parts of the world. And these deals which my department used to have to do the calculations on, we're always cautious. Actually, for the long term, we want to be aligned. We want to be looking to the fastest growing parts of the world, like India.
Okay.
There's a few things I want to say on this, because the question was, is this a victory for the government? I don't know. It's a silver lining in an otherwise horrendous week. Can we rely on promises from Trump? No. But there's a reoccurring theme that's actually already come up so far in the discussion tonight, and that is this a victory for working people? You know, can we trust politicians that have been convincing us to take decisions and back them? You know, I don't want to reopen the Brexit debate because I'm sure there'll be people that voted in different ways in this room, but we should be paying attention to the politicians who encouraged us to take a gamble on Brexit, and now we are seeing trade deals that we are manifestly on the negative receiving end of. You know, you pointed it out, we're going to be having whether it's our NHS or other sectors of our economy plundered. We, as working people, are going to be able to afford to buy fewer things. And there's a real hypocrisy looking at some of the politicians that are saying, oh, we wanted trade deals and sovereignty, but not like that. We didn't want to be on the negative end of that. Well, hello, that's our reality. And we need to, as a working class movement in the UK, or wherever you sit, start realising that politicians from mainstream parties, many of them are part of a political elite, a transnational political elite. We know that your leader is big pals with Donald Trump. They are profiting from our misery. They are profiting from this state of affairs, and they are peddling hate to us to distract us from realising that is what is going on.
Richard. I mean, you've had two people now talk about, you know, these trade deals, whether you like them or you think they're not good for the government. The fact is, they're not in any way improving the economy as much as it would have if we'd stayed within the EU.
No, I disagree with that entirely. Brexit is a great opportunity. The fact that we're doing a trade deal is because it's a Brexit benefit. You couldn't have done that if you're part of the European Union. Look, this deal, the information we've got so far, it's work in progress. It'll be a partial trade deal. I do think, James, you should take the message back. We should be given a full debate on it in the House of Commons, and we should be given a vote on it. But look, this is work in progress. Let's see what the real detail is.
Don't worry about the cost of living. It's work in progress.
Right. OK, and so it's a partial trade deal. Things have been excluded, like hormone-treated beef. I mean, take cars, for example. The truth was that previously we were charging 10% on imported cars from the US, and yet the US was only charging 2.5%. So there was a mismatch there. The right place to get is to get to 2.5% or 0%. So...
but there's a mismatch now in that we are paying more to send stuff over there and they're paying less to send stuff over here.
But it's been levelled at 10%. We obviously want to try and negotiate it down. And these things don't all happen at once. They take time. We want to get it negotiated down to zero because we export some great cars to the US. But let's remember, the US is a fast-growing economy. It's grown a lot faster in the last 15 years than Europe has. And it's just worth reminding to those who think that Brexit's a bad thing, you know, Germany is in recession. Most of the EU is in recession. It's doing a lot worse than we are. We're spluttering and struggling. Why would you want to handcuff yourself to a recessionary economic zone? You want to actually target high-growing economies around the world, whether it's Asia, whether it's Australia, whether it's America, whether it's Canada. That's how we can get more jobs, faster growth. But the truth is that, as someone just said, relative to the overall domestic economy, these, you know, our exports, I mean, America is our biggest single trading partner. But remember, where we get the surplus on our exports to America... As
an individual country, obviously, the EU is our biggest single trading partner.
But where we get the biggest surplus with America is actually in services, where there are no tariffs. So you've got to look at it all in the round. Something is better than nothing. I think this is good work in progress.
OK, I'm going to try and fit in two more questions if I can. So I'm going to move on to Martin Fox, There you are. Let's hear your question.
Is net zero by 2050 unachievable, or is it simply being defeatist?
Climate defeatist, which is a phrase we heard in the House of Commons this week. There's a lot of talk about net zero. Calum, you want to go even faster than 2050, don't you?
Well, thank you, Martin, for the question. I think probably like many folk in the audience, as a father and as someone who thinks about the next generation, I'm deeply concerned about the impact of climate change. We see it in our own lives and we see it around the world, and we see the impact that it is having on our planet. And it is incredibly important that we take that seriously. I regard it as probably the greatest generational challenge that our generation faces as to how we respond to that. Now, part of that is responding to the challenges we see. So in my area of Oxfordshire, we had terrible flooding last year, which was unprecedented. How are we going to respond to that? How are we going to build to protect our communities and our homes from what we know is coming our way? But part of it is how do we play our part in taking responsibility for the impact that our actions have on the planet and on other communities, including much more vulnerable communities elsewhere in the world. And that's the reason that the Liberal Democrats are in favour of working hard and collectively to tackle climate change and to achieve our net zero targets.
And you want to get to net zero by 2045? Not by 2050. So the question is this achievable?
We believe that we need to set out ambitious targets. That if you speak to,
is it achievable? That's the question.
If you speak to folk in industry, as I do regularly with many innovators in my constituency, they say what they need is a predictable framework and the incentives and the opportunities to work towards it, and they are up for the challenge. Many businesses and many local government authorities are actually further ahead than national government in the level of ambition. We should fall behind that, and instead of shifting and tilting the targets each time there's a bit of pressure, we should actually get behind this with a solid industrial policy that supports a transition towards net zero.
So, Graham, I'm trying to work out where you stand on this debate. Because you said in 2023,
So we.
net zero offers an opportunity for an economic renaissance. Rolling out renewables is lowering the cost of energy. It's expensive fossil fuels, which are making everyone's energy bill so high. We are going hell for leather to increase green energy. You now describe it as madness. So which is it?
No, what I describe as madness is Labour's policy on it. They brought forward from 2035 to 2030 the sort of clean power proposal, which, as I was the person responsible for it, I can say it literally can't be done.
So it's just the 5 years. Is that literally all the differences?
No, that is one of the many ways. What you also have to do is marry the economics. We did transform it, because it's little known that Labour's the inheritance we had from Labour in 2010 was less than 7% of our electricity was clean energy, renewables. By the time we left power, it was nearly 50%. We'd taken homes from only 12% being properly insulated to over half.
So what are you saying is madness now?
What is madness now is that you have to, for instance, we saw the madness of Labour's policies at the moment. Yesterday encapsulated it all. We saw 250 job losses in oil and gas. Our biggest oil and gas producer is Harbour Energy. And they've sacked a quarter of their onshore workforce yesterday. And we are going to be importing oil and gas instead of producing it here because Labour say we'll have no licences in the North Sea. That is crazy. We also saw yesterday that the biggest offshore wind farm in the world, which I worked on as a minister, Hornsea 4, we had 1, 2, 3, as we built it out, led the world. Hornsea 4, under Labour, guess what? Cancelled. Because it's no longer viable under Labour. So they can't do renewable energy either. And also yesterday, but less reported, was the future technologies, carbon capture and storage, which is so vital to this area. We've got the Viking project, which is a big store just off the Humber. Harbour have also said they're reviewing the staffing of that because Labour have not come forward with the plans and proposals in time. So they're stymieing us on oil and gas. They're not bringing forward the renewable energy, and they're even closing down the development of the vital industries for the future. They've made a horrible mess of it, and that's why I said, when we were in power, that the biggest enemy to the delivery of net zero, because, like Calum, I believe it is a big generational issue, but we've got to get it right, economically as well as environmentally. Right. Otherwise, the rest of the world will never follow us, and our own policy will be fruitless if the rest of the world doesn't see us as a success in delivering it.
Man there in the glasses.
Net zero is a viable aim, but ultimately, without the infrastructure in place, it's a great soundbite, but we're not getting anywhere with it. You look at electric cars, for example, all over our towns and cities, but the infrastructure isn't in place to deliver them effectively. So what are you, as our politicians and elected representatives, going to do about that?
OK, let me hear from the man in the white jacket and tie, white cardigan.
Yeah, I think my main worry is the decision making on this topic. We live on one of the windiest islands in the world. We should be building more turbines so we can export that green energy for the future, future-proof our economy rather than thinking about us now from an energy perspective.
So, James, Graham mentioned it, and you're talking about wind power. Hornsey 4, which is not that far from here, they planned one of the biggest offshore wind farms, which is critical to your target of reaching net zero electricity generation by 2030. And now it's not going ahead. Surely you're now into the realms of impossibility.
Well, no, look, put it in context. We've got a strong pipeline of developments coming forward for offshore wind,
and we're going to work with
and we're going to work with them to get that back on track. But can I just put this in context as well?
But, OK, let's understand what that actually means. That basically means they want... let's be very clear.
Hang on, Richard. I'm more than capable of asking the questions. Hang on. When you talk about Hornsey 4, they're saying it doesn't make economic sense. What the government so far says, we're going to work with them. Does that mean, what, giving them subsidies to get it back on track? What does that actually mean?
Well, look, I'm not going to set out all of the discussions we'll have with them in due course. But
at the moment, you've got one of the biggest offshore wind farms, not far from here, and they're saying it's not going to go ahead.
And it's a company that we will work with, and it's part of a really strong pipeline of offshore wind. But the other point here is about decision-making. But the other point, well, it is happening across the country, and the really important point is about decision-making that the government controls, because we've talked about offshore wind. The other aspect is onshore wind as well. And when we came into office, there was effectively a ban on onshore wind turbines introduced by the previous government. We got rid of that as one of the first decisions we took when we got into office. That has meant that suddenly all of these onshore wind turbines can actually go ahead because they have certainty. So all that investment around the world, which was ready to come into onshore wind, can now come in. If you look at, solar panels, we've consented more solar in the last 9 months than they did in 14 years. That's enough to power 800,000 homes. This is possible if you set your mind to it. And actually, what this is about for me, it's about energy security. It's about energy independence to make sure that we don't have to depend on foreign dictators' whims. We can actually have energy security here in the UK. It's about making sure that we can bring down bills, and it's about making sure that we can have good jobs across the country. And if you have jobs, bills and energy security, that is why this is so important.
Off you go.
We should be under no doubt. Net stupid zero is the greatest act of financial self-harm ever imposed on this country by the two main parties. and let's be very clear what's going on here. They promised us lower bills, but our bills since the general election are almost £300 higher. Experts say there'll be another £900 higher per household by the next general election. I've asked Ed Miliband numerous times in the Commons, when are the bills going to come down? Let me tell you why we won 44 councillors and control of Lincolnshire County Council. Because the Lincolnshire residents don't want 40,000 acres of solar panels. They don't want hundreds of ugly pylons blighting their property values, blighting their own value, blighting their property values, blighting the countryside. And the truth is about Hornsey 4, actually, they've just said we're going to pretend that we don't want to do it so that we can negotiate a higher subsidy so that they can make more money and all of us will suffer higher bills because there's a new round of auctions, contracts being bid for later this summer, and Ed Miliband has just literally opened the door and says, don't worry about the price, folks, I just want capacity. So Hornsey 4 reneged on last year's deal so they can get a better deal this year. That's what's going on.
And in terms of your policies, or net stupid zero as you call it, is there a reform policy to do nothing on green energy?
We should scrap net zero, and that's what we're going to do.
So that's what I'm asking. So your policies do literally nothing to reduce carbon emissions.
The best form of carbon capture, folks, is trees. Even the Green Party don't think that the technology for carbon capture works. Why would the government want to spend 20 to 30 billion pounds of everybody's cash?
OK, so just to be clear, so the reform policy on climate change, and I'm not saying this to mock you, I'm just trying to be clear, is to plant more trees and that's it?
There are a variety of things you can do. But the point is, the climate's always changed for millions of years. It always will. Anybody that thinks they can stop the power of the sun is ridiculous. And what this is doing is driving up the bills when we're promised the bills are going to come down.
I don't think anyone's talking about stopping the power of the sun. I think generally it's about what impact can be had on man-made emissions, which are contributing to climate change.
And how much do they contribute? About 3 or 4%, Fiona, as you well know. OK? So the rest of CO2 emissions are natural. I just asked James, when are the bills going to come down if we ever increase the renewable generating capacity? Just tell us when, James.
Well, I can tell you what keeps the bills high. It's every time you oppose. Every time you oppose putting more wind turbines onshore, every time you oppose solar panels, that keeps bills higher.
We've got the highest renewable generating capacity and the highest bills in the developed world.
Your party is acting in a way that keeps bills high. And by the way, if I can just say one other point, Fiona.
Briefly, because I want to bring Jo in.
Your policy is putting 5,800 jobs here in Hull and East Yorkshire at risk. 12,000.
And your policy has destroyed tens of thousands of jobs elsewhere in oil and gas.
Lower bills and energy security.
And it's not working. And that's why we got double the votes in last week's election.
OK. Can we have a measured and sensible conversation for a second? Because I've got a brutal truth that I'd like to bring into the chat, which is if we stay on this path, we are looking at 1.2 billion climate refugees by 2050. That is not a warning. That is a forecast. And there's been much discussion in this debate about...
And where's that forecast come from?
That forecast is from the Institute of Economics and Peace, right? And there's been a lot of discussion already about, you know, people being hammered by sky-high heating and electricity bills because we are still hooked on gas. If you want stable energy, then the fastest way to do that, the one direction, is renewables and fast.
So while the bill's going up,
if I could just say...
Richard, you've got to stop interrupting and let people speak. Jo.
In terms of Labour, because other questions that have been asked today is, what are we going to do? I represent people who work in colleges. You occupy a space in the Treasury. If we want economic growth, if we want net zero, we need to be pumping money into our colleges because they will be educating the people and training the workers who will deliver net zero. And at the minute, we are not seeing anywhere near enough investment.
Woman in the white top.
Thank you. I just don't understand how you can sit there and call it net stupid zero when this literally affects people's health. These emissions kill people. I mean, I'm sure that's been proven that asthma's on the increase. There is a campaign in Hull, which I hope the panel knows about, for net zero, that states that Hull is quite bad for carbon emissions. And until we become net zero, the UK won't be able to. So we need that investment in that infrastructure. But ultimately, it's about people. There's no planet B.
All right. Man in the black T-shirt there. Just in the far... Well, actually, let's hear from both of you. The man in the glasses, smiling so charmingly, and then the man in the black T-shirt behind you.
Right. The cost to industry of energy is crippling it. It's ridiculous. And if you have a look at steel in Scunthorpe, we were told that the energy cost was the main reason behind the demise of the steelworks in Scunthorpe. And that's true to a lot of industries in this country. And I'm just worried about what the cost of this is ultimately going to be and the timescale to which it keeps changing.
OK.
We don't know where we are.
Man in the black T-shirt.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, if there's any doubt whatsoever as to how serious the Reform Party are serious, you have to look at the response there on renewable energy and the climate as a whole, which is a global issue. That is how we are a developed country. We are in a position where we are a democratic society and we can have influence around the world by the decisions and choices we make. Their response is trees. Maybe it's inextricably linked to the fact that they're funded by those within oil and gas and those capitalist societies. That's it.
I just want to say I've got about 6 minutes to get another question. Universities. We're going to talk about universities, Jo. You'll be glad to know about that. Right. Andy King, whereabouts are you sitting? Yeah. Where are you? Oh, there you go.
So universities are warning they're on the brink with rising costs and frozen tuition fees. If nothing changes, well, students in whole regions be left behind.
Right, so universities, 43% of universities in England are expected to be in financial deficit by the summer. That's according to the Office of Students. Main reason being a large drop in the number of international students coming in, and international students are effectively propping up universities by subsidising the fees that British students pay. I think that's a fair summation, Jo.
Partly. We're in a funding crisis, essentially, in universities that didn't come out of nowhere. Part of it is that universities have developed other revenue streams, shall we say, and that has been a massive explosion of recruitment of international students and over-reliance on the income that they can generate from them. But another major part of that tacks onto that is when we saw the introduction of fees and then extended fees in the UK, that was to cover essentially a cut in government funding. So not only are we not getting enough income from student fees because we've lost that funding, but we're chasing that additional funding by essentially massively exploiting international students. So yes, it's true that that is creating a crisis, but what it's also creating is a boom and bust. Many people would argue that putting fees up is the way out of this, but all it would do is make the boom and bust more acute, because we have some institutions really aggressively trying to over-recruit to kind of fill up their coffers, and that leaves some institutions with a recruitment crisis. So at the minute, 1 in 2 universities roughly are trying to make cuts. We're looking at about 10,000 jobs in the university sector. Okay. This is absolutely huge. In Hull alone, we've seen over 200 redundancies. We desperately need Labour to step in with a plan. We've had additional funding in Wales and Scotland.
OK, let me ask you, because I've only got 3 minutes left. I hate saying this does not give the time this question deserves, particularly as we're in a university building. What is a Labour plan?
Well, we want to support universities, and we know that the funding model at the moment is not working for universities or for students. Now, we've set out some changes in terms of allowing some of the fees to increase, but we know that over the long term we need to work with universities to make that sustainable, because actually in Britain we have some of the best universities in the world, and it's a crucial part of driving economic growth as well.
We're going to lose 10,000 staff in the meantime. Like, we are in the middle of a crisis. Okay. Like, we can't wait.
Calum?
Well, I should declare an interest, as before I became an MP, I was working at the university, and like Jo, I saw just how critical our universities are. They're places of opportunity for our young people, and they're places of innovation and evidence. We've already seen in our discussion this evening the importance of having evidence that's reliable and at the heart of things. And we can see in America Donald Trump attacking universities. Yeah. Why is he doing that? Yeah. Because he doesn't want there to be evidence. We should stand behind our universities.
Would the Lib Dems give universities more money?
We think that the university sector and the college sector, which is a really important part of the whole ecosystem, deserves support in order to be able to innovate.
Does that mean more money?
Well, research is a big part of what we've been describing here. We've cut ourselves off from some of the real pathways of research funding by some of the decisions that have been taken by previous governments. We'd like to be back in Horizon and in a full way in the European Union and partnering with other places so that that revenue stream can be returned and we can see our academics working with other people around the world to generate extremely important evidence.
Richard?
Yeah, look, it is a challenge because also think of actually the students. Too many students are leaving with an average of £40,000 plus debt, plus interest on that debt, which is giving them a huge financial burden as they leave. Maybe, actually, I did a paper on this in 2017, maybe we need to look at more 2-year degrees as opposed to 3-year degrees in order to reduce the overall cost for students in order basically to try and sort of close the gap, because there is a funding gap, there's a funding crisis, but also at the end of it, students are leaving and saying, well, I've got all this debt, but I'm not getting higher paid jobs. Have I been missold a duff deal? And I think many of them are.
Failing universities in terms of funding, is this a problem you just handed on?
Well, James just mentioned the additional letting fees go up so that the debts will get even larger. But that fee increase isn't actually sufficient to pay the additional costs which are flowing through just from the jobs tax, the national insurance rise. So universities are joining the 200,000 businesses that shut, the businesses around here that are shutting because of Labour's mismanagement of the economy. So there's a short-term problem caused by that, which Labour has made worse. But
universities were underfunded under Conservative government as well.
But there is also the issue of moving to a more sustainable position, where we've got as well, where every university, the idea was that the different universities would have different price point. You had everybody ending up at the 9,000 and then 9,300. It is chaotic. It needs a fundamental change. And Richard's not wrong to suggest that we need to look at more modular courses. We've got to make sure that where people borrow that money, that they get a return in life, because otherwise we're conning them and we're putting them in debt, thinking they're being educated, and in fact their life doesn't get richer, it gets poorer as a result, and that's not a result for people.
I'm afraid we are out of time. A few of you got your hands up and I can't bring you in, so apologies for that. That is it for us this evening. Thank you very much to the panel. Sorry we had to rush that last question. Thank you very much to all of you for coming and putting your points so energetically. And, of course, thank you to you at home for watching. From Question Time in Hull, bye-bye.